Well, welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm going to present a fairly wide variety of approaches and ideas, and it's going to focus on the materials themselves and how you can use them, and then how they're applicable to our particular subject matter. I know that everybody has kind of a different range of colors in the sample pack, so if you don't have the same colors I'm working with, then that's okay. I know that there was an attempt to make sure everybody had green materials as far as the pigmentation. And so if something happened where you uh, don't worry about not making your leaves green. They can be purple, they can be red. In fact, at one point I had been doing some screen printing work, and I was given an ink to test. And at that point, my daughter was 2 years old, and I was making her little images on sweatshirts, and I made an elephant, and of course mixed up elephant gray. And she said, "Oh, I want a red elephant." And I thought, I mixed all this gray up, and I thought, well, yeah, let's go with the red elephant. And the red elephant was so much better than the gray one. So ever since then, and that's been over 30 years ago, I am very flexible about what color I make something depending on what's at hand, because that's the most important thing. You can make anything work. Okay, so I think that everybody has a reference photo, printed sheet of different plants. Those are the ones that I will be demonstrating with, so that you'll have a guide. It's a little bit hard to have a camera on the plant and detail of what I'm doing. So you can work that from a reference, but I'm also going to have, I'll give you some shots of the plants as I'm working. But the other thing that happened was that, it's really hot, and a lot of construction work outside of where I am. So instead of going outside to do this, I brought the garden in. So I kind of uprooted some of them and replanted them and nurtured them. And so now we have the garden that was in your reference sheet is now in my studio. So we'll work from that. Okay, if we could switch to the overhead camera, then we'll continue talking about what we're going to be doing. And can we get the, yeah.
You want me to highlight your workspace
Yeah.
now? You got
Yeah,
it.
that would be great if you could, the workspace, because I'll start pulling a few, kind of examples out and continue talking.
All right,
Okay,
you're
well,
good.
excellent, thank you. So I thought I'd start with why I started uh, working with the notion of drawing plants. I illustrate kids' books, among other things. I have my own characters, and I've always enjoyed doing that. But I've been also influenced by artists that have preceded me that use a lot of plants. Now, I thought very quickly, just so you have an idea of what my style is, this is one of the books I illustrated, Shoeshine Shirley by Leo Kamiko. And my style is that I have a really strong black line and then use watercolor to fill it in. And most of the things I've illustrated have been more kind of an urban type of situation. And so have enjoyed doing that, but I wanted to expand a little bit. And when I was growing up, I come from German background, so my grandparents had a lot of these kids' books that were done by Fritz Baumgarten, and they're very charming. I loved all the insects, the way that he drew, but in analyzing what he does, primarily he has these beautiful watercolors, and they're just full of these really lovely scenes of gardens and plants and whatnot. And so the main characters have, again, the very strong line and some nice bright color. But I was just fascinated at how beautiful his settings were. And so I decided that I should start practicing drawing plants and stuff so that I too could kind of incorporate images. Another example of that is by Ida Bohata. I think she might have been Swiss, but it's the same type of thing where charming characters, but what really makes it for me is that she has some really nice, delicate kind of watercolor renditions of plants and stuff. So that became my focus for a while. This is a piece that I did with a bug miraculously holding up a bunch of animals, but I wanted to develop a background in through here so that it would be a nice frame. It's almost like the staging, you know. So if I'm telling a story, it's kind of nice to have the stage set by what's in the background. Okay, so I usually first start off using a lot of work in sketchbooks. And so I thought just very quickly, here's a page of one of my sketchbooks. Go out, and that's the other thing too, is that all the characters come out of my head. And so what is interesting to me is to be taking things that I see. So instead of making things up, I observe now, and it's a nice combination for me between observing and making, you know, the characters interact. Um, you know, I'll just show you some more quick examples. And again, these are like on site. You know, I just would stand there, and you know, I have found that sitting down, a lot of times I'll just even sit on the sidewalk because a lot of times the flowers are in beds that are more at eye level. And I'll just start to sketch, and then I look at it and I think, well, I'm not sure how this is going, but the more that I work on them, then I feel the more that they kind of start to develop. So these were done with the Albrecht Durer watercolor markers, and we'll kind of get into their use and, you know, some suggestions on how you might think about using them. But I thought, you know, first we'll just kind of look at some examples of things. And then I did some studies in a botanical garden, in an actual, you know, kind of greenhouse thing, and more exotic plants and stuff. And it's just fascinating to learn how to do these. And my notion now is that I want to study the plants. I like to draw them, not so much as the end product themselves, but for me to gain the information so that when I use plants in my own work, then, you know, it's not just something that I make up, but it actually has a little authenticity to it. And I think it just enhances the whole thing. All right, so maybe I'll just kind of go to an empty page, start working from there. Now, I mentioned sketching, and the variety of materials that you have in your pack are ideal for sketching. But if you want,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Good question, because we've had a couple people ask. A couple people have asked for the name of the illustrator of the children's books on insects.
oh, okay, yeah. One of them is Fritz Baumgarten, Baum, which means tree, and Garten means garden, like kindergarten. And there's Fritz Baumgarten. And the other is Ida Botan, Bota. I'm going to get her spelling. Bohatta, Ida Bohata. And I'm thinking that she might have been Swiss, but you know, she's kind of in that general area. Okay.
And I'm getting some questions in the chat about, oh, somebody just put, was getting some questions in the chat for folks that missed the sample kit link or didn't get their sample kit. They're asking for the reference images. So Laura just went ahead and posted the a PDF in the chat.
Okay. Well,
picture for packet.
And what I've done as we start talking about drawing and things, I went ahead and snipped a sample of each of the ones that we're going to be drawing, and I'll have it someplace on my pad as I'm drawing so that it also will be a reference point for people.
Great. Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. Okay, so, you know, when I go out and I decide that I want to sketch, sometimes I'll take a little kit with the watercolor markers or, the pencils or something like that. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But one thing that's kind of nice too is that you can use something like a fountain pen. And so that if I want, I can be looking at images and just do a real quick little thing here. We're also going to be going to talk about a little bit about how to make flowers beyond, the target front on view of it. But, once you get some of your key lines down, then because this is like most watercolor inks are water soluble and stay that way, I carry a water brush pen. And what's nice about these, they unscrew, you put water here, and when you squeeze it, some water comes out. And so that instead of having a brush that is maybe a little bit longer, a little bit more awkward for just, kind of going out and just saying, hey, I want to stop and do something, I can come through and I can start to hydrate some of that and pick up some of the pigment. And then I can come through and get a nice wash drawing. And then there's enough of the ink mixture that if I want, then if I want something that's a little bit softer, kind of more to stay in the background, then I can pick some of this up and then just move it around. Now, the one thing about using watercolor and building up in layers and stuff, it's kind of important that, paint on paint, and whether it's wet, whether it's dry, works pretty well. But that if you get involved with something like a fountain pen or a pencil that has, kind of a more abrasive tip to it, I don't want to go back working into that immediately. I want that to dry a little bit because when the fibers of the paper are wet, they're a little more vulnerable. But if I want to on a side piece over here, and in a sketchbook, I mean, I think part of my sketchbooks that are most interesting are the combination of little informal scribble stuffs and the stuff that is a little bit more directed. But then I've made myself like a little watercolor pan here. And then if I have some areas that I really want to get a lot darker, then I can just keep on drawing out like in through there and in here, up and through there. But I really like that kind of subtle wash effect that you can get with just a real quick sketch with your fountain pen and water brush, and there you go. And I mean, you don't necessarily have to do washes. You could just keep it into a totally linear thing, and that will do that. Okay, so for the sketching, and then also the other thing that are really nice for sketching are the watercolor markers themselves. But you also have a pit pen, a black pit pen. And these come in, I believe, 60 colors. They aren't just black, but there's a formulation that's very similar to India ink. And so when these dry, they're permanent. And so that, I could do the same type of thing if I want a bolder line. And with a brush point, depending on how you hold it and the way that you work it, I can use a little bit of pressure, but then if I want to bear down and kind of whip it around, you can see the way that it has a very dynamic quality to it. And that's the type of thing that I try to get in my illustrations, and that also works very nicely for organic shapes. So that if, again, if you're doing, some kind of a floral thing with petals, you can kind of just emphasize one side of them, so you get more kind of a shadow or a thick feeling for it. Then you can use other colors. But once that dries, we'll kind of pretend that it does, I can take one of my watercolor markers and then go back and color it. It probably is not going to, this is not dried enough. You want it to dry for about at least 15 minutes or so. But then you can come back with a regular brush or a water brush. And then when you go over the line, this is permanent. And so that if you want to be a little more effusive about the way that you do it, now you can see that it is interacting with that ink because it hasn't set in the paper yet. But even that, you could use that for an effect, have a little darker leaves, but yeah, we don't have the time of, I don't want to spend 15 minutes waiting for that to dry, but I think that you can get the idea. So you can have something that's very graphic like that. The other thing that comes with these pit pens, this is a fixed point. This is an S point, which is a super fine point. And so that if I want to make a contrast between something that's a little bit more organic, a little more dynamic, I could do some other things maybe in the background that have a more regular line. And so it depends a lot on the effect that you're after. If you want something that's a little bit more graphic, this might be the way for you to do it. And again, with the brush pens, like the black one, they come in about 60 colors, and they're quite nice to work with. But they are permanent. So you could do a combination, as I mentioned in through here, where you could put the black line, give it plenty of time to dry, and then go over it with watercolor or watercolor washers, and you're all set. So you've got quite a bit of flexibility in how you can approach things, and especially when you're working in your sketchbook, these kind of materials are ideal. Now, as far as the markers themselves are concerned, yeah, the Albrechter watercolor markers have two tips. One of them is the brush point, and the other one is more kind of like a bullet point. And so this is a little bit more regular. This has a lot of flexibility. And then the thing that is quite nice about it, let me clean my brush here so we don't get black all over it. A roll of paper towels or a chamois skin or something is really nice, so that if I want to get rid of the black, I just have to get a little squirt of water, and there we are. Okay, so you can see, we'll get a nice swatch here. So all I have to do is just put a little water on that, and you can see that you get a really rich watercolor effect. So now this, has kind of the strokes that you associate with a brush, with a marker. And then as you give it some water, you can see that you can go from a very intense color down to a really nice wash. And then when that dries, then you'll get, some articulation of the pigment in there, and, it can be quite beautiful. It's similar to the Albrechter watercolor pencils. And in handling these pencils, these are fabulous just as regular color pencil, but I'm always just amazed that when you hit them with water, they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They become, in similar fashion to this, they go from a drawing material to a paint, and I'll kind of let them intersect a little bit. And so these are the type of things that are going to be really handy for doing some of the plants. And another thing too is that if you want, you can produce your own watercolor pad. So if you have a scrap piece of paper, you can pick out, your favorite colors. I do this when I travel. Now that COVID is a little opened things up a little bit, I'm more apt to do this. But on a little piece of, some paper that I can easily put in my sketchbook or in my wallet, I'll make these little areas of color. And then if I have one of my water brushes, then if I want to, I can use these like watercolor pans, and then I can come by and, I can do a whole variety of, if I have a card full of, a full range of colors, then it's like traveling with your own watercolor set, but, the thickness of a paper. So traveling with a sketchbook and some of these things, you don't even need the pencils with you physically if you do something like that. Okay, so that's kind of the way that a lot of these the materials work. Watercolor markers, the Albrechter watercolor markers, and the watercolor pencils. There also are pit pens, which are the brush pen that I showed with the black, and they also come in a variety of colors. So as I mentioned, you can do something permanent with these, and then modify them with a watercolor, either the pencils or the markers because, you know, these are permanent, these are water soluble and can move things around. All right, so now let's get directed a little bit more in specifically to the flowers. And I think the first flower I wanted to talk about, let's see, we're going to snip one off. So I have something to give a little bit of a guide. And put it in some water. I'm going to switch over to a different paper. Now, the paper in my sketchbook is Stonehenge white. And it's a nice, really heavy, 100% cotton fibered paper. And it has a lot of sizing in it. And particularly the hot press watercolor Legion paper has even more sizing in it. So for people that aren't familiar with, you know, papers and stuff like that, it's really good to pick out a paper that's going to suit what you're trying to do. The Stonehenge white is excellent for multi-purpose, you know, just about anything works splendidly on this paper. If you're using water-based materials like, you know, watercolor markers, and pencils, there's, I prefer the hot press Stonehenge Aqua. And that's what this is. Now, hot press means it's a very smooth surface. A lot of watercolor artists prefer cold press, which is much more textured. So, you know, you can imagine really kind of sweeping washes that look a little bit rough. That would be done on a cold press surface, but they treat the surface of hot press so it's really, really smooth. Now, sizing in a paper protects the fibers of the paper from absorbing pigment too quickly. And, you know, kind of as an example, I don't know if this is going to show up or not, but if I put a bunch of water on this paper, do you see how that beat it up? So I can, you know, I can maybe wiggle it a little bit and you can see it a little bit more, but that's just a big glob of water. You know, it's in that shape and it's about half an inch thick. And so I can add to it. But you can see that this paper is enough sizing that I can put a huge glob of water there and the paper's not going to absorb it. So why this is important is that a lot of your watercolor is going to be about moving color around the page. And if the fibers of your paper lock onto the pigment and you don't have a chance to move it around, then it's going to start building up to be a little bit more opaque rather than that real nice kind of light, thin quality, beautiful quality that watercolor has. So this particular paper has quite a bit of sizing. So you have a lot of opportunities to do things like you can put color down. If it's too strong, you can take a paper towel, you can pick it up. So it gives you extra time to manipulate the image and the pigment to get what you want before it permanently sets into the fibers of the paper. And this particular paper, in addition to having a sizing on the outside, it also is made with what they call internal sizing. So this is really an excellent paper for watercolor. All right, so now let's kind of just talk about our flowers. And so I will put those up a little bit.
Franz,
Yes.
real quick, sorry.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked, and Laura answered generally, but I just want to address the one question. Somebody had asked, how long do the watercolor markers and the watercolor pencils stay resoluble?
They, you know, I've never worried too much about that because it's rare that I would do something and then, you know, the next day or later suddenly decide that I want to alter them. You have plenty of time to work with them in a, you know, kind of a normal working session. So that, you know,
You have to experiment then.
Yeah, you kind of have to experiment. You know, I've never actually, you know, take my stopwatch out and, you know, stayed up 24 hours to check it out. But, you know, I found that they are malleable for a good bit of time. I think once they dry completely, you know, after, you know, the longer they're dry, the longer they probably will be set in the paper. And again, that is more of a function about the way that the paper fibers lock onto the pigment. As I was explaining, if you have a paper that has a lot of sizing, then you have quite a bit of time to work with them. I'm not talking days and days, but I'm talking within like hours. You could still, kind of probably manipulate them a little bit. But in a lot of paper, in fact, I was working with a paper recently that, I wasn't sure what it was, and I mistook it for, something that had sizing, but it was closer to what they call waterleaf paper, and that's paper that doesn't have any sizing in at all. And once you put your pigment down, it gets sucked up there, and no matter what you do, aside from just abrading it totally away, you cannot get that pigment out of that paper. And so that I had expected to be able to do a drawing where I could really push the watercolor materials around, and it just got sucked up. So I had to totally, kind of redirect my efforts in how I did that and redid the thing on a piece that has sizing. So, I mean, I think that if you're using a good quality paper that has a lot of sizing in it, you should have plenty of time to make corrections and move things around. But it isn't something that you can kind of think, well, a week from today, you can decide, okay, well, actually, I'd like to move that over a little bit. You probably will have more of a problem at that point. And you will always, if you have a watercolor and it's finished and, it's sitting on a table or something, somebody spills water on it, it's going to affect it, but it may not be as malleable and as pliable as you'd like if you were trying to make a change. That help? Okay.
I
So,
think it definitely did, and I think the bottom line is that there's no standard. Because there's so many variables based on the type of paper that you're using.
yeah, and I think that
Weather could even affect it, I'm sure, so you just got to play around.
yeah,
Right.
and I think that the one thing about it is though that, for me, watercolor is about using the white to come through to make it glow. And if you make too many corrections, if you keep on fiddling around with it, you certainly can, get it to change, but you're starting to lose that really beautiful immediacy of the pigment and the water, which is, to me, what the watercolor is about. So, you don't want to be overly fussy anyhow. So, just the kind of changes you can make should be as spontaneous and kind of in the moment as applying them. I guess that's what I'd say. All right, let's get to the anatomy of this particular flower, and I'll kind of hold it up. And this is kind of looking at it straight on. It's very symmetrical, and so we'll kind of approach it that way first. So what I'm going to do is sketch, and I'm going to make my graphite line here a little bit darker than I normally would because I want it to show up. Okay, so in geometry, if you have a square, if you draw a diagonal and a diagonal, where they intersect, that's right in the center. And so when we look at the flower, we kind of have a similar thing. We've got, this kind of circular thing right in the center. So I'm going to just kind of sketch a circle right in there. And then right in through here, if you have a line that's perpendicular to the two sides and it goes to the center, then that divides that in half. And the same thing happens in through here. So these are the midpoints on all the lines. And then if I want to draw a circle, then I just go from this quadrant around here, and this is a quarter circle, and then I can use that as a guide and then come around here and go there, come around here and go like this, and go around like that. So if we had a flower that was, the petals were exactly continuous and the same size all the way around, we'd have something like that. All right, now when I'm looking at this, I notice that I've got almost like a cross here in the diagonal. So this fits exactly with what we're doing here. So it gives me a guide that if I want to do a petal here and they come almost straight down. There's a little bit of a taper that goes out, so I'll try to include that, and a little bit of overlapping. But I can deal with the symmetry of this flower. So what I'm doing is kind of analyzing this to get a sense of how this flower is made up. Just like nature, it's not totally perfect, my drawing at least. Now, with watercolor, when I start to apply watercolor to this, it start mixing with the graphite, or you can see the graphite through it. So at this point, generally what I do is take a kneaded eraser. And if you're not familiar with kneaded erasers, um, they're a very soft, pliable, somewhat sticky eraser. And if you want to get rid of hard lines like that, you might be better off to use a harder vinyl eraser. But what's nice about these is that you can just kind of pat them down. So I can get rid of most of the graphite by just pressing down, and it sticks to the eraser. And if it gets too dirty, you just knead it in there. And with all the stuff that's in here, it's just remarkable how dirty the whole eraser and how long those things can last. All right. Okay, so there we go. We got rid of, and again, I don't want to get rid of all of these lines because, I want you to kind of see the guides, but on the other hand, and then I'll go in between the petals to kind of help distinguish where those are. Things that we don't really need as guides anymore, I'll try to get rid of as much as I can. Now, I usually use like a, HB pencil, something that, and use very light pressure. But again, because, we're looking at through video, which sometimes things don't show up so much. So it kind of comes to the point and kind of comes down, comes to the point. So I'm going to get that going in. Okay, so we kind of have the basic structure of our flower if we're looking straight on at it. All right, now a lot of times you'll have flowers that, in the arrangement that I have that you really can't see, but you can maybe see in the reference that, you've got a view of flowers that, some of them are bent over a little bit, and some of them are maybe just a little bit more like that. So you have different, some from the side. And so if you want to get kind of a collection of the way that one plant has, in my case, most of them are kind of almost like flying saucers. They're a little more horizontal. And so I can use the same general principle in those type of flowers that I can with this. So if I kind of maybe from up above, let's look at that view, okay? So in that case, what's happening is that you're seeing less of the dimension from here to here because it's standing up. So if you think about, let's say you think about a kitchen stool, if you're right above it, you see a circle. You really don't see the legs. But if you start walking away from it, and instead of looking like right above it, you're starting to see an ellipse. All right, so the distance from here to here is the thing that flattens your view out. You still see the width of it, but from front to back, and you start seeing a little bit of the side. And then you get to a point where, you're looking at it and you're looking more and more at the side of it. So then, you get this view. And of course, the legs are coming down at different things. Then finally, if your eye level is looking straight on at the stool itself, then you just kind of see what appears to be a rectangle. You can't see the top or the bottom. But, this is kind of the way that you can think about what's happening to your flower, whether it's, going from horizontal that way or vertically, it would be the same thing. But in this case, it would be more the height than the width. And then there's everything that is kind of in between if it's tilted. So using this as kind of an example, let's draw another, oops, sorry. Let's draw a trapezoid. All right, so the back of the flower is going to be here. The front of the flower is going to be here. And then we'll connect the two. So this is going from flat on and more onto, like a tilt as you look at it. So the same thing happens though. You go from corner to corner, bisect it like this. And then this is the ellipse from this view that you have now when you're looking at it more at that plane. So you can kind of see that we've gone from looking bullseye straight forward to it being more at, kind of it's at a slant. So I guess, yeah, like something more like that. All right. So the same thing applies. We got, the outreach of our petals, and then we've got the center. And in this case, we can see more of kind of like a dimension to the center rather than, kind of the bullseye target. And the same thing happens. I'll just kind of sketch in, this petal, that petal, that petal, that petal. And you can see that the appearance is that the petals in the front are getting longer, but that's, kind of goes with the optics of it. That ones that are closer to you are going to look bigger. And so now you have that arrangement, and that looks more like kind of a flower that is tipped up. I'm looking at 90 degrees to the way that you are, but it's more of a flower like that rather than a flower that's like that. So you analyze these kind of shapes when you look at a plant that has many blossoms. Okay, so let's go into the actual coloring of it and start using our materials. Now, I usually have a tendency to go, I like to start off light, and of the 2 points, the brush point or the bullet point, I kind of save the bullet point for little details and stuff, but I love the brush. So what I might do is kind of start with concentration down there, and instead of doing the whole thing, what I'm going to do is use my water brush and kind of get it to be a little lighter and a little more transparent. And then what I was talking about, lift off and manipulating the materials because of the sizing. If I decide even that is a little bit too dark, I can always take a paper towel, and when I lift it up, I pulled quite a bit of it up. And I can either go someplace else on the paper and use my brush to pick that up, and then kind of come back and maybe apply some in a few places, and then use the heel to move some of that pigment over to the side. So this is what I mean about, the work time that you have while it's still wet because of the size. You can push things all over the place. All right, so we also have the color that is kind of at the top, and I'm going to put it in this case, I'm going to use, my yellow. And if you have some other color, I mean, just whatever colors you have, use. And don't worry about whether it's the same as what I'm doing. But I'm going to kind of sketch all the way. And I have kind of these streaks. Okay. Now I'll take my brush, and I'll get that to move around a little bit so that I kind of have almost like a feeling of stripes. I don't know if it's going to show up because a lot of times on these videos that some of the more subtle things don't quite show up, but it's almost like I've got shadows, which is kind of what happens in through here. where you have kind of a rib, a series of ribs on each of the petals. All right, now the reason that I didn't kind of limit, stop the yellow before I get to where this kind of rusty color is, because these are markers are pretty transparent because they're watercolor, especially when they're diluted. So I'm going to kind of make a little bit there and then take a brush, my water brush, and I'll get rid of the yellow. And then I'm going to pick a little bit of pigment up in here. So now I'm going to kind of do the same thing, kind of put some streaky stuff. But the color that results between putting an magenta on top of that yellow is more of kind of that rusty color. And so you can make more colors, like, you know, if you have a limited range of colors to work with, if you work with the transparency of the material, then, you know, this color is definitely different on the white paper than it is on the yellow. So I'm trying to take advantage of that, and I'm keeping everything kind of light and transparent. So it gives you an opportunity to start building up in the more shadow areas or the darker areas with more pigment. If there's something that I feel like, oh, I got that too dark, I can always take a paper towel and kind of blot it a bit. I had thought about bringing a hair dryer, but that just the noise of that is too. So we'll let that set up a little bit before we go back into working on it. But you can kind of see the way that it's starting to progress, where it is, you know, coming up with a nice facsimile of what we've got to work with. All right, so the same thing is going to happen with this flower down here. I should have made it a little bit larger so it looked about the same proportion, but go with what we got here. Yeah, I want to get rid of, let me get rid of most of the guidelines here. So again, you know, I'll go with the brush, center off on the individual leaves, petals, and ink. In this case, I'm just going right for the full blown stuff instead of making it like that, just to give you a different approach to it. Okay, so I might just blot that a little bit to kind of get anything that's still wet on it. And then I'll do the same thing, I think, with this, is that I'm going to re-deposit some pigment from the brush, take the water brush, and then kind of do a similar thing, just because the yellow is so much more intense than up above, then this is going to be a little brighter. And so it probably could be okay to start getting this in again. I kind of like the way that, you know, if you're working on wet, it has a tendency to bleed out a little bit. And I think that that's does a nice job kind of imitating the coloration on the flower itself. And you can also use it, you know, you can use a traditional brush with this too. It's just, I find that it's very handy to use a water brush. Set up a little bit, come down here and maybe start. Yep, that was so effective, it picked up just about all of it. It's a little bit wetter than I thought. Okay, so while letting, you know, our base set up a little bit, we can start talking about the stem and the leaves. Now for that, you know, to be a little more accurate in terms of the way things really are. If you have a green, we'll go with that. And because these are watercolor and you can make them very transparent, then you actually have a wide variety of greens available. Okay, the one that I'm going to use, it's a number 170 May Green. And I find that I use this for quite a few of my floral and botanical drawings. It's just a really nice color of green. So I'm going to get rid of our reference point. I figure everybody has an idea what we're doing with it. Okay. Now, the brush point is ideal for foliage. So we'll get rid of most of that. Now, with, we'll go to a different little segment here of paper. As it has a tip to it, I like to start at the base of a leaf, press down on it, and then let it taper out. So it's very continuous. It's darker down here, goes up to a point, and then I kind of come down the other direction, maybe a little darker, and kind of come up and meet down like that. So already it's very convincing as a leaf. I don't have to do anything with that too much more than I already have. Somehow I managed to lose my water. Oh, here it is. Okay. So then I can kind of come back and very lightly with a little bit of water, instead of making that have a really bright center vein, then I can change a little bit, then I can come through and I can finish shaping it with my brush or a water brush. And for this particular plant, then, this works out to be a nice leaf, kind of mimics, I hate to torture my plant here. Take a peek. Okay. Now, once that dries, then I can come back and use yet another layer, because once you put one layer down, if you put another on top of that, it gets darker because it's transparent. So here's 2 layers, and then here's, you can see you go from and this is full strength. And when you apply water to these, then you've got the full range of dark to light. So then once that dries and I start working on it, then I will be able to get, a sense for shadow and the way that the leaf bends. As it is, let's pick some of this up. And then, when I'm looking at this, you won't see too much of the stem because we're looking at it straight on. But if I just kind of bring it down, that got a little thick, but that's all right. Get my stem. And then I can start figuring out where the leaves are. And, if you have the reference photo, I doubt that you can actually see. But yeah, I have the stem of the leaf here, and then it comes over and around, and because it's tilted a little bit, let's move this over. Okay, and then a lot of times, this is what I'll do is I'll start working on it with a very light color. Comes in through like this. We got some more leaves that are just kind of straight out. This has a very high stem. I mean, normally it'd be down here and then the leaves, but I'm trying to fit everything in here. Okay, and so now I can come back with my brush point, and I can look at it, and I can see that it's a little bit darker in through here. The light's coming key thing that, yeah, this comes in and around, and it's kind of dark and flat like that. I can take the brush and take a little this, and because this is kind of standing up a little bit more towards the light, and look a bit more like that. Okay, so this heat pump a little bit. Okay, so it comes in through here. And what I find too is that with these particular markers, I don't know if you can tell if it's detailed enough. Maybe I can hold it up so you can see. But when you look at that leaf, it isn't just flat. You get little ridges and you get little shadows in there. That's very similar to what happens to leaves. All right, so it looks like, I've labored for ever trying to get those tiny little veins in there and all that kind of stuff. And it was just a way of kind of manipulating the pigment in the brush in a way that you get some texture that is reminiscent of that. Okay, I want to get that oozed off a little bit, but that's okay. So we'll get maybe a little more going on here. Maybe I want this to be a little bit lighter. Yeah, if you make a contrast of what is intense, what's light, you can kind of manipulate the visual focus of what you're doing. And so I might want it a little bit darker here. Okay, so let me look at this leaf. Okay, again, it goes along kind of a spine. In this case, they're both kind of, let's see, what's what we got. Do a variegation there. Through, work it in. Rolls around. This one you see almost just that one side of the leaf. But when it kind of comes through some of the detailing that is just a matter of the pigment flowing in the washes. Subtle shadows there. There we go. All right, so quickly, because I want to move on to some other ideas about doing these things. Let's just put a little more into our flower petals that we've been waiting to dry a little bit. Yeah, okay, so that's a little bit better.
Hey, friends, somebody's asking, will you be using the pencils in the demonstration as well?
Yeah, yes, that's coming up.
That's what I just need to be patient and see how the magic happens, right?
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is kind of build these things up as I would, when I'm working on a drawing or in my sketchbook. And, these are just kind of like handy little bits, I think, to kind of show you the method. And, you could decide to not speed things up, but maybe bring the pencils in a little bit sooner. Right now, I was just trying to kind of, demonstrate, the use of the watercolor markers and how nicely they do the petals, the leaves, and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I think, we can work into the pencils next. And the thing that's so nice about all the Faber-Castell products, they're what's called color indexed. So they use the same pigments regardless of what material it is. So if you're using a Pitt pen, if you're using an Albrecht Durer watercolor marker, if you're using a watercolor pencil, polychromos, which is their regular more standard, or the classic color pencil. All the pigments are the same. In fact, I kind of arranged a series of the pencils and the markers, if I can very quickly pick out the ones that I have. Like, I'm looking for that. Okay, so to introduce the pencils, one thing that's I noticed I got to sharpen this, but you don't want to use an office pencil sharpener. You want to use some sort of handheld sharpener. Now, the reason for that is that, with a regular pencil sharpener, it gives you a much more of a steep angle and a sharp point. And in graphite that they have for regular office pencils, this is really strong, so you can get by with that. But especially with color pencils, these are very soft because it's mostly pigment. And so if you would sharpen the point on a pencil, color pencil, that first thing that's going to happen when your pencil hits the pad, you're going to shoot that point across the room. And so the angle in a hand sharpener is set more like, if you think about the little golf pencils, you're going to get, for the same diameter of lead, your point's going to be more like this. And what happens is that you have a lot more strength because it's thicker all the way up to the point. So you're not going to get as much breakage as that. So when you're going to sharpen, you can use, this one has one for color, one for regular graphite, and one for an oversized pencil. The Faber-Castell pencils, whether it's whatever pencil they make, is glued along the whole barrel. So I don't know if you've had pencils where you sharpen it, the lead falls out. That's because they've been glued here and here and here. And if you accidentally drop your pencil and the lead breaks, you're going to lose all the lead up until the next glue spot. But these have been crafted so that they're glued the whole way. They use really high quality cedar. So they're always right in the center. Sometimes that happens too if the color isn't central to the pencil. When you sharpen it, you'll get wood on one side. So these are crafted so that never happens. And it's one of the reasons that I enjoy using them. All right, so here is the same, I think I said it was 170 May green, apple green. Yeah, this is 170 apple green Albrechter watercolor pencil. And then here is my equivalent 170 green apple marker. Okay, so it's the same pigment. And then when I come in with water, especially, there's that, and there's that, and they're the same. Kind of thin that out so it's a little bit comparable to the other one. So that means then, after I'm developing this part of my drawing, and again, you want to make sure, if you do like multimedia type things, make sure the paper is dry before you start using a pencil, because you don't want to destroy the fibers. But what I'm going to do now is, if I want to kind of get detail, if I want to refine something, so sometimes I have a little more control with a pencil point than I do with a marker. So if you're working on like kind of trying to make that look like it's cupped, and then joins the other things in through here, you can see I'm still using the same pigment that I just picked up off of that last one. And if there's some part of this, that I want to make darker, like, underneath here, that to be kind of a shadow, I can leave it just as pencil full strength. And then I can smooth it into what I already have there. Now, we never quite, kind of finished working here, but I can, kind of start working on that or down and through here with a green to start getting that to be more in shadow. Okay, so let's flip to, I mean, does anybody have any questions just about the basic, we could keep on working on this and, I can kind of, let me pull the illustration down. So this is the one that I did earlier when I was kind of thinking about how I wanted to do the demo, but I think it shows, rather than spend a whole lot of time on one thing, I'd like to get on to, something else here. But you can kind of see the way that you can build up with layer after layer. The leaves were a combination of the pencil and of the markers. And then, also for myself, I did a little experimentation about, what we were talking about, how to make the flowers look more natural instead of, kind of bullseye targets for the next, shootout or something. Okay, so let's go to a different flower. And so we have one here that is pretty geometric in a sense. And maybe we'll start the next one off with the pencils, and then we could add watercolor to it. Again, part of what is happening is that sometimes there's a tendency, this is a linear thing. And when you think about leaves, I think of them more of the surface. And so if I'm doing leaves especially, I'm more apt to use a brush because what I'm doing is carrying a whole surface. I'm much more attuned to the surface and the shape of the leaf when I use the brush pen because it covers the area. So I'm thinking about the surface area of a leaf. And so I'm more apt to do a leaf with the marker. But, with things like the flowers, then, sometimes if they're very delicate or if there's something about them that you need maybe a little more detail or something. Let's go to these. I have this really kind of nice pansy. I think it's a pansy. It's a little miniature thing. I have them all kind of in one thing, and not all of them want to come out at one time here. Okay. So this will be our next one. And I wanted to preserve some of the, kind of snap the bud off, but okay. So now we've got, I don't know if I put it like that, it looks like that's a leaf because of that one. Okay, so let's go to the pencils now. And again, I'll kind of look at the way it's constructed. This has, kind of like two petals here, and then this actually is one petal, but it's almost like two petals. And this isn't a flat flower. It's like, one petal is kind of sticking up this way, and the other is this way. So I'll draw very lightly. And then from the center, which is in through here, it kind of overlaps and comes out. Same thing here, kind of comes through here like that. Okay, so that's so that's the outline. But again, I want to kind of be thinking that this actually is, right. Then in back of it, as you can see, that's like the little one that's in through here. But then there are these two larger petals that are really intense in color, and they kind of come to a center here and come around and then come all the way over to this side. And then there is, so we have that one. And this one kind of comes in through, comes a bit like that. So it's kind of a complex flower. It's very interesting. And then we've got the center is in through here. And then we've got these kind of gradient lines that I'm going to put in very lightly that kind of come here. And as I draw these lines, yeah, like if you have like a tablecloth, or let's say a shirt, if you have a sleeve of a shirt and it's lying flat and it's a flannel shirt, you'll have patterns that stay kind of geometric. But when that goes on the arm, those lines become curved because they follow the shape. These may kind of stay more or less, but these are the ones that are really kind of describing what's happening here. So the same thing happens here, that if I had all the lines kind of coming like this, it will flatten it out. And that's okay if you're kind of developing the notion of a pattern or something. But if you're trying to kind of get a sense for the dimensional quality of this flower, as I draw those so that they curve, as they come here, then this one has more of a curve, this has more of a curve. This one kind of actually moves about like that, and then this one comes here and then goes out like that. This is going to help kind of imply that these have a dimension. So I'll come up here with this one, just like that. Okay, then we've got some yellow, and there's some, if you really want to get, very detailed, there's some, but those are the kind of lines that you might want to add later, again, with the pencil. All right, in this case, I think that, the overall coloration is this really, really deep purple in the background, but I could just go ahead and apply some in one place. Let's see, this is where the most of the shadows are here, and the darkest part kind of comes up in here like that. And so I'm anticipating kind of putting this color in, so then I can take my brush or my water brush, and I'm going to kind of, there's just a little bit of a highlight in there. And then the rest of it is, this really kind of nice, rich purple. And muddy to green. So I can work that out, get rid of that. And again, as I mentioned, I have a tendency to go light to begin with because I always darken it, but I don't want to lose that sense of transparency too soon. Okay. Now, coming in through here, it's more like a lilac. This is more of a deeper purple, which I'll, kind of enhance with either my pencils or the marker. But it's more on the edge, and it kind of goes to these little spines. It's running a little bit, but that's okay. I don't mind that at all, because I'll be able to tie that in. Okay, so to save time, I am going to kind of, normally I'd let that soak in. Oops. That was a little too severe. So let's go back and put some more of this in there. I gotta use a dry brush because I'm afraid that, I don't want to get any quality is. There we go. I mean, you can see how rich this color is just from a little bit of the marker. Okay, so there we go. Now this might be a good time to employ the Albrechter watercolor pencils. Let's try that. Okay. Let's get a yellow. I think I'm going to use the yellow marker instead quickly. The trick is going to be to get that yellow so it's kind of nice and intense here. And then use my brush so it can go from being intense to kind of more of like a light yellow. And I don't mind that it's picking a little bit of the purple up. Enhance it just a little bit more in these areas. Kind of spread. So it actually even comes down here. Now this might be almost dry. Okay, so I'm going to start putting in this little center marks that come in through here. They're a little more intense as they come to the center. You can also think about this a little bit richer, lighten it up, make it a little bit darker so I kind of get the coloration as I see it. And a lot of it is just very, how much detail do you want? How, yeah, I don't want to necessarily use the word realistic, but you know, how much rendering do you want to do? It has a lot to do with what your purpose is in doing it, what you want to accomplish, but with these materials especially, it's just so much fun working with them that I think that you'll find that you could spend hours doing these things. I did have one drawing in my sketchbook that I wanted to show you before we run out of time completely. Just kind of come down like this. Okay, so if there's some areas that I want to get a little darker, I could start working my, okay, this one actually kind of is a little bit darker, see there. So, you know, I can go ahead and take my brush and start working the pencil. I can get some really nice little gradual tones. In through here, it just gets this really lovely kind of lilac shade. The only place that's really bright and white is down in through there. Okay, so anyhow, again, with the leaves, if I look at where the leaves are, I've got one that has kind of like a point, and this is more kind of like a serrated leaf. And so I can kind of go with the vein structure this way. And then I take my water brush, so I get a little contamination there. And then with the pencil, once that dried, I could come back and get maybe a little more, you could put like a little bit of a darker shadow on either side of the serrated edges, and that will kind of help. But yeah, it's still looking pretty serrated there. So you kind of see the way that you just manipulate, move, you know, like all watercolor, you're moving the pigment around here and there to kind of get, yeah, where you need to go. All right, I know that we're getting close to our time, but if it's okay to keep going here, I had a few other little items to call your attention to. And one of them is that, you know, if you have something like, oh, where'd they go? Here they are. Okay. I have this guy, all right. If you can see it, because it's white on white, and they move it on to the red. But, you know, this is like, I don't know if it's called phlox, but, you know, it's a ground covering, but it's made up of all these, a cluster of teeny, teeny little flowers. And then when you look at, it's almost like a bush. So how do you do that? And one of the materials that I use that weren't included in your kit, but something that I think you would be, it'd be nice for you to be aware of, is liquid masking. And, you know, there are all sorts of brands of this. I checked, you know, Plaza, there are 2 or 3 different types of, you know, manufacturers for this stuff. But essentially, it's a latex. In this one, it has a nice little thing to it, but I find that in most cases, I kind of like working from it. What this does is it temporarily seals the paper. And so that you can define what this flower looks like by drawing all the greenery around it. And that's kind of hard to do unless you have a very small brush, but let's just kind of sketch out. Let's say that you have a clump of flowers here, and some here, and some here. And just, you know, I'm doing some green because it could be surrounded by green. Now, before I take my brush and dip it into there, I don't want to ruin my brush. So any dish detergent will work. And I've got, you know, a small little sample of this. And I dip my brush in it so that I get the bristles coated with this soap. And it will not dilute the latex, but it prevents the latex from drawing on the bristles. So now I can pick this up and I could, you know, kind of move it around. I can get a bit of texture to it. I can put little dots. I can think of each of these brush strokes as being one of those little flowers, but I want to do it kind of in a general pattern, you know, because when I look at a group of this, I see this shape that's made up of all these little parts. So if I can take this masking fluid and kind of simulate the shape, and you don't have to, I mean, this has a little bit of pigment in it, so you can see how thick it is, and you don't have to have it very thick at all. And in some cases, I'll leave a couple little holes and all that, and I'll move it around. All right. Now, at this point, I want to clean the brush immediately, but because I have that soap, it makes it possible to get it all out, and I can use this brush for anything else that I normally would. I don't have to worry about suddenly discovering that a bunch of the bristles have this rubbery stuff on it. And because it is latex, it's virtually, I mean, it could ruin your brush. So that's why it's really good to have that detergent first. Now, what I've done, I went ahead and I just kind of did some in anticipation of what we're going to do. So it's now dry. And I got to take my brush pen and I'm going to start doing a whole kind of little, these have like tiny little leaves, but they're mostly stems, a lot of stems. So what I'm going to do is just start kind of filling up the background with a bunch of stems. And then, as I said, like, you know, I can make a nice leaf by just pressing down. And that's characteristic of this nib. And so what I can then start to do is kind of maybe put some leaves here and there.
Somebody asked, so do you usually outline with the pit pens in the beginning, or do you usually outline after you have painted?
It's up to you. I mean, I think most of the times when I'm doing this kind of work, if I'm going to outline in the pit pens, I won't necessarily use the black unless I want a really graphic look. And by graphic, I mean, like the black line kind of, if you think about in real life, none of these flowers have any black lines around them. It's just a matter of, now these are a little bit harder to see because it's white on white, but as soon as I kind of come over and put it against the red, the definition of that shape is not an outline, but the contrast between the white and the red. And so that's what, when I'm doing the backgrounds and the floral aspects to my work, I will avoid any kind of a black line or a sharp line that totally delineates. Now that's my style. For other people that are doing, like fabric design or some kind of dramatic wall hanging painting or something like that, you may want that to be a very sharp line. But even at that though, if you do want to outline these things, you could do it first as a guide and then add the pigment to it, because the pit pen ink will dry, and give it plenty of time to dry before you put the watercolor on it. But then once it does dry, if you put the watercolor on top of it, or if you put the watercolor down first, and maybe you have some real kind of, let's see here, let's grab another marker here real quick. Let's say you have leaves and you've kind of done something like this. There's some leaves and they're very kind of very fluid and all that. Then once that dries, we'll pretend it dries if I can locate where I put my black pens. There it goes. Now these are going to kind of bleed a little bit because it's still wet, but then I could kind of decide to do something like this, and then that could be very, kind of nice design graphic effect. And then once those dry, since I used water to kind of apply that, I could use the Albrechter watercolor pencils or markers then to start coming back into that. So if I want to use a marker, in this case, I probably would go for more of a sharper point. Maybe, I'm going to start thinking about, okay, I'm going to put some dark green there, some dark green here, maybe put some more shapes, but this time I'll just make them solid this. And then I could take a Albrecht Durer watercolor pencil and then maybe start coming through. And what I'm doing is going light against dark to try to get, kind of a, even though it's a flat, everything is flat, it still starts having kind of a volumetric feeling to it because I'm putting light against dark against really dark. So if I build up 3 tones, then, that's going to have a different effect than if I make leaves without a line, like I was kind of talking about down here, where I just do something like that and like that, like that, like that. This is going to have a slightly different effect because it is an outline, and especially if I go back, like I'm planning here with, I can kind of soften those a little bit and then come back and I can build up a cluster of leaves by brush marks and get the values. And then if I clean that off,
Looks like we have some questions specific to the masking fluid, if that's all right.
okay. Yeah.
The first one is, well, I guess I think I'm going to ask the second one first because I think they're related. How long do you have to wait for the masking fluid to dry?
It depends on how thick you put it on. Right now, this thinner coat up here is already dry. The thicker parts still have a little bit more to go. So,
Okay.
yeah, how long have we been doing this? And also, like, if you're in Florida and it's 90 degrees humidity and you're outside, it may take a little bit longer. Uh,
Um,
yeah, it doesn't take long. It doesn't take overnight. It takes, as I said, depending on how thickly you've put it on, it may take 10 minutes, it may take 5 minutes, You just have to kind of very gingerly see when I touch that, I can tell that that hasn't dried completely.
um, do you find, I find that the masking fluid will get lighter as it dries, right? So
Yeah. Yes.
and that might be an easy way to tell where if it's blue masking fluid that you're using, that when it's dry, it'll lighten up to a very light blue.
Yeah, this was that little well that I put down there to draw from, and it's pretty thick, and it's obviously still wet.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
How
nice.
dark that is, right?
And then you look at any of the stuff that's dried, and it's a much lighter blue. Okay, so I could fuss with this, but I think you get the idea that you can develop the vegetation around the flowers first, after you've masked it out. And so I want to get just a little bit more tone around it. And then you can have some of the other flowers in the background or whatever. But so I'm going to kind of very quickly, again, this is try to show you the effect rather than do a precisely finished drawing here.
And I think you're demonstrating the other question, but the other one was, do you paint on top of the masking fluid when it's dry?
Yeah, go right on top of it when it's dry, because this is protecting the paper and the watercolor will not stick to it. But what you're doing, since I have a really light, delicate flower in there, in order to do, it's like I make 50 flowers in one little cluster. I don't have the patience to take a little thin brush and kind of go around every one of them and render them. I much rather think of it as this is the shape, and then I'll go back and I'll put, a little bit of value on some of the leaves to give you the sense of the individual blossoms, and then I'll put like a tiny little light green center in each one of them. So, okay, we're going to pretend that that is now, everything is dry. You can use a rubber cement pickup.
So you're just rubbing you're rubbing your finger over it to get the masking fluid off, right?
Yeah. So it's like, it's like rubber cement. And, what I'm going to do is take a towel because that'll help it go a little faster. I should let it dry a little bit more completely, and if you have a rubber cement pickup or like a maskoid or liquid Frisket masking fluid, it's just like a rubber cement eraser. But I usually, find a paper towel.
And then someone's asking if you can use masking fluid on black paper. It works the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just, it seals the paper.
And then there was black paper in the sample pack.
Yes. I had
if you have some time to touch on that when you get a chance, because someone asked,
so I won't complete taking it off entirely, and I have smeared a little bit, but I mean, you can see what the effect is. I have all this intricate web of vegetation that I build up with watercolors, and then I've removed that, and now I can come back and I can think, all right, where are, I can look at the cluster and think, okay, I've got, some here, I got some here. So already just by kind of putting little centers in here, starting to get, kind of a sense that this might be a cluster of flowers. Then I could take a light blue, light gray, a slight yellow. Like that here. Okay, let me grab some from my case here. These may be a little bit dark, but I can come through then and say, okay, well, these all that, yeah, that's way too dark. Brush together. So I can say, okay, well, these two botanicals here, cover and shadow. That's still a little dark. And I got some more here. So you can start kind of breaking these up in terms of the shapes, and then maybe if this one's in front, you might kind of put a little extra value to separate this block from that block. And with a little bit of work, you can kind of get these things to then start looking more like it's made up of like an individual clump of flowers. Okay, now with the black paper, fortunately, I don't think I brought black paper with me, but the watercolors on the black, unless you're using like a pan watercolor where you can really get them to be very thick, it's very difficult to use the Albrecht Durer products to get it to really show up on the black. But one thing that you can do, I don't have my a piece of black paper, and I could get some, but it'll work on the red as well. These are Pitt pens by Faber-Castell. You get one in white. You can either get a small point, you can get these thick ones. And what I can do, I'm trying to get it on this coated paper. Yeah. Well, let's see. I'm sorry that of all this stuff that I got together. If I would have 2 seconds, I could get some black paper, or yes, no.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, just
You have time, as we discussed before, I'm here until you're done.
okay. I know where it is.
Take a moment. And for those that are typing in the chat that you have to go, that, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And you're so welcome. I mean, I love doing these events, and I'm so happy, a positive, one of the positive things to come out of us all, being quarantined are these amazing events, and we don't plan on stopping them. So
I agree with that. I think that there are some positive things that have come about, and the whole notion that I can be talking to 65 people and still be, I mean, it could be in my pajamas, but I'm not. But
yeah, exactly.
Just as a kind of interesting thing, this was just an image that I did when Stonehenge came out with the black paper, and it's screen printed with white ink. And what happened is that instead of traditionally you'd print these black lines, but I printed on the outside of it so that the black paper became the line. So there are all sorts of, it's like going to opposite land. And so when you think about working on a white piece of paper, you have the paper as your highlight, and you start piling graphite or whatever media you have to make it darker. So you're going from, you start with the highlights for the whole paper, and then you work up to the shadows. What's opposite with the black paper, you start with your shadows and you want to start blocking in where the lights are. All right. Now, let me get one set of watercolors. And I think that I don't know if you have the connector watercolors, but again, these are Faber-Castell.
Mm-hmm.
So what I can do, I mean, they have a number of really nice watercolor products, but and we'll kind of keep this on the plant still. All right, if I take red, and I can put nice concentration of red on it, and so that might be kind of my brightest red. But then as I draw it forward, it's thinner, and so the black starts having more of an influence. And then I get to a point then where it's in shadow. And it's because the thicker areas are blocking the effect of the blackness of the ground of the paper, much the same that when you build up layer and layer of graphite to make a shadow, it is counterbalancing the effect of the white paper underneath. So again, it's just kind of an opposite thing. So let's say that's, and so then I could come up with another one here. And then, so it's the idea of, I want to kind of keep in mind where I want my shadows, or where I want, this color to be the most intense. And of course, once this dries, these paints dry a little more opaque than when they're first put on. But I can then kind of come back, and once they're dry, I can put another layer on top and another layer on top. So if I'm thinking about maybe some kind of bright red flower, and I've got the petals that I have going here, and then they start kind of working into the center where that they're going to be a little darker. So, poppies are kind of like this, where it's really jet black in the center. And then let's see, let's kind of start getting into here, and then the ones that are in the front. I just invented a new cup flower. Get Montana or somebody like that to start injecting. Okay, there are a number of these, kind of trumpet flowers, or Rose of Sharon, and flowers like that. Now,
So we don't carry the those specific, is that an opaque watercolor, like Pelican is another?
it's actually, I find it to be a really nice watercolor to work with, but it's part of the Red Range, the kids product.
Yeah, the red range. I was looking. I know I've been shown these before.
These things are really fabulous because, I mean, you can use them on white paper like a regular watercolor, very transparent. You can make them really transparent, and they're very vivid colors. And in this case, I'm working on black, and so that I'm using them a little more opaquely with a little less water, and then they become more like a gouache or an opaque watercolor. So if they can be whatever you want them to be. You can have them be transparent. You can have them be opaque. You can do it on black paper. They're very, very versatile, and they're just so intense. I mean, when I work with kids with these things, they go nuts because it's like, oh, come on. The story that I always tell, when I was in grade school, first grade, we were introduced to watercolors. I was really excited about it. And the only thing that happened was my paper got wrinkly, soggy, and just kind of real weak washes. Um, and I just decided, oh, I'm no good at watercolors. And when I started illustrating kids' books, I had a project that screamed for watercolor, and I thought, oh man, what am I going to do? And so I kind of decided to bite the bullet, and so I went to a real art store and got watercolors. And after the first stroke, I realized that way back in first grade, I had really crummy watercolors. and, and it just made me convinced that, I couldn't do watercolors for, like 40 years. I thought I couldn't do watercolor. So, I mean, that's why I'm really a fan of giving kids the best materials, you can, within budget.
It's
idea.
important. I think I agree, and the Faber Red Range is a really nice, um, we have a lot of the Faber Red Range products, but it's a great stepping stone from, let's say, like Crayola to, the next level.
Yeah, and that's why
For not a terrible amount more.
Yeah. And I always say that, if you have, like, if my son wanted to play football, I'm not going to buy him a cardboard helmet. I want to make sure that he has, and so for me, like, giving kids less than adequate materials, I think kind of puts them at a handicap, because I've found also for myself, I mean, I used to be also kind of terrified of gouache. And by the time I went through school, gouache was kind of hardly anybody used it anymore as an illustration technique anyway. But I heard horror stories about it and stuff. But after I started, when these first came out, when I started using them, like more of an opaque thing, it led me to rediscover gouache. And so some of my more successful illustrations have been done in gouache, and I never would have done that if I hadn't used children's watercolors. Okay, and then you could imagine then we could have like a stem coming out of there that could be bright yellow and all that stuff. But essentially, what you're doing is that you're thinking about, you're starting with shadow, and if you start off with in the center again here. If I have like a real thin application, the black is going to darken that. And then the more opaque or the more layers of pigment, then, this becomes brighter and brighter. And, again, if I give this a little bit of time to dry and build up some layers, I could get this red as bright as that. And what I love about, I could show you, again, if you could tolerate 2 seconds for me to go grab something. Yeah.
You're good.
Um,
We are approaching 3 o'clock though.
okay, well, we'll kind of, after I show you this, but
yeah,
these are examples of things that I've done on black paper. All right, this is actual watercolor. These are, well, you'll see it upside down, but these are color pencils. These are the polychromos. This, actually, let me just kind of put it done. This is gouache. The chicken is gouache. And again, like I never would have used gouache if I hadn't used this connector watercolors first. These are characters that I did with acrylic ink. And the snowman, I think, is the best example. Kind of, I just used that white marker that I was showing you from Faber-Castell and developed the form by, once you put it on, then you let it dry, and it's a light gray. And as I build up, you can see how bright the white is in the front, and that's because I have 3 or 4 layers of marker on top of it. And then this is just the same. The snow scene is, there we go. That's just a transparent white, and I kept on reducing the screen so that the really bright white was printed by the same white that is in everything else, but it has more layers of it. So, black paper is really interesting to work with. And I always kind of think of it as, in a Shakespeare play, like in Hamlet, they have Hamlet do his soliloquy. They have a spotlight on him, but the rest of the stage goes dark. And so I think drawings that you do on black paper end up having a certain drama that you don't get on white paper. Because I think sometimes white paper has a tendency to be so bright that it will overpower, everything else. So with the black paper, it kind of gives a dramatic aura of, kind of a mysterious kind of aura. And that's what I find interesting about it. So very quickly with the white marker, if I put that down on the paper, it's going to look nice and white to begin with. But then as it dries and as the paper absorbs the pigment, it's going to go more to a gray. So if I let that dry completely so I don't, repick it up, then I can add another layer. That's nice and bright. And, so forth until the example of that snowman where all of a sudden it's like, wow, you get really bright white highlights. Or, I could go back if I have white gouache or something like that. If I really want a stunningly white highlight, I could, paint it in, or, there are all sorts of techniques you can use. But when I did that snowman, then, I kind of thought about, okay, let's see. Now for his eyes, I don't have to draw the eyes. I have to draw around the eyes. And then for the body, if I want little coal buttons. And then, with a hat, I can kind of think about everything around the hat and maybe kind of put a white band around it. Okay, so if I let that dry a little bit, then I can go back over it and I can think, all right, like let's have the light coming in from this direction. So I start building up here and kind of taper off as I go to the back because I want to keep that in shadow. So same thing for this part. This is a little brighter in here. I can kind of get, and then, usually if you think of the way spherical things are backlit sometimes, you can get smaller white pens. And then I can put kind of like a little highlight here on the top of the carrot nose. And here. You kind of see the way that the thing is that, again, you're working towards the highlights. You're going from the shadows, and you're working towards the highlights. Then, once this dries, I think this will be kind of a, I forgot about his mouth. Well, he has nothing to say. Snow on top. What I find, as I was mentioning about the quality materials, when you have materials that are so fun to work with, it kind of encourages you to push yourself and see what can I come up with. Let's go beyond what I originally thought and let's push for something that might be a little more intriguing or something that's a little more exciting. So, for kids and adults, beginners, everybody, get the best qualities you can manage. Okay, so I think that kind of gives you an idea of the notion of things. But then once that dries, and we'll pretend that it has dried, I would normally give it 15, 20 minutes at least. But once that dries, then I can come back with one of my watercolor markers and I can get a nice vivid color. Whereas if I put it on the black paper, that's the white.
All right, Franz, we have about 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that I pretty much showed the basics. I don't know if anybody has any final questions, But I think to sum up, it's mostly about, kind of what you want to do with stuff, with your images, what do you want it to be? And I don't know if I showed that up close or not, but this is kind of one of the more finished sketches that I've done. And what I'm starting to do, I use the frisket on here. This is more of a finished example of kind of what happened. But when I put my garden in, somebody gave me this goofy little octopus figure. And so for me now, what I'm starting to do is kind of build up these floral settings and then have something that is real in the environment that would act, similar to the goofiness of some of my characters. So I've just really had a lot of fun going outside, sketching plants and analyzing things. And it's just hours and hours of being absorbed by something that is transformative for me. So I hope everybody else can enjoy their work as much as I've been able to enjoy being involved with mine.
That's so great. Well, you're getting rave reviews in the chat, and so I think this was fantastic. I think everybody loved it. If does anybody have any final questions that you want to take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask? I'll just leave that open for a second just to make sure. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate you participating in these events. And Franz, we really appreciate you. You're always amazing. I've learned, you're painting on the black paper, and it reminded me of that time at the in Las Vegas where we made the metallic
oh yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it was so fun. It was so fun. You get, you always do a great job.
Well, thank you. That's because I'm working with really nice materials and really nice people.
Yeah, it's a great industry, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And just, the people that, I think people, whether you're making art, promoting art, sharing art, whatever, it's a nice perspective. And I find that everybody that I interact with seems to be just really nice. I really enjoy it.
Great. Well,
thanks everybody. Go out there and have fun.
Exactly. Play. Have fun with your samples. There'll be an email tomorrow that'll go out that'll have a brief survey as well as a link to the recording for today. So if there's anything that you want to go back and rewatch or share with friends, you're very welcome to do that. It'll be hosted on our YouTube page. I can't tell you an exact time, and actually I apologize. Lauren might be listening and saying, I told you. So we never really know how long, it takes to process the video to get it up on the YouTube page. So we get the email out as soon as that's available. It could be tomorrow. It could be on Saturday or Monday. So I want to manage expectations there, but you will see it soon. Okay. Everybody a wonderful, fabulous weekend. And thank you again to Franz and to Beth and Laura. You guys are in there somewhere. We really appreciate you working this all out. So, all right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.